Horse won't let anyone near the field. When they investigate, they can't believe their eyes. The morning air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of dew-drenched grass as the small town of Willowcreek began its day. Nestled at the outskirts of the town lay Sunny Acres Farm, a sprawling property owned by Emily Hayes, a 32-year-old farmer who had taken over the land after her parents retired. Emily was known for her unrelenting work ethic and her deep bond with her animals, particularly with her 7-year-old palomino mare, Grace. With her golden coat and a mane that seemed to shimmer like sunlight, Grace was the pride of Sunny Acres, a loyal companion who followed Emily everywhere. Before we move on, let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. One morning, Emily stepped out of her farmhouse, pulling her jacket tighter against the chill. Her eyes swept over the rolling pastures and the wide open fields where her horses usually grazed peacefully. But today, something was off. Grace stood in the middle of the eastern field, her posture rigid, her ears flicking nervously. Emily frowned. That field was bordered by a dense line of trees and had been unused for months. Yet Grace was there, pacing along the edge of the field as if standing guard. "Grace!" Emily called, her voice carrying over the still morning. Normally, the mare would trot toward her, ears pricked forward in greeting. But this time, Grace didn't budge. Instead, she let out a sharp whinny and stomped her hooves. "What's gotten into you, girl?" Emily murmured. She grabbed a bucket of feed from the barn and began walking toward the field. Grace's behavior grew more erratic as she approached, pawing the ground, snorting, and pacing in a way that seemed almost frantic. When Emily reached the gate and tried to enter the field, Grace charged toward her, stopping abruptly just inches away. She reared slightly, her golden coat shimmering in the morning light. "Whoa, easy, Grace," Emily exclaimed, stepping back. Her heart pounded as she realized Grace wasn't just agitated, she was blocking her from entering the field. Emily set the bucket down, her mind racing. She had never seen Grace act this way, not even around unfamiliar people or during thunderstorms. The mare was protective, yes, but this was something different. Something was wrong. "All right, girl," Emily said, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. "You win for now, but I'm going to figure out what's going on." Emily spent the rest of the morning checking on her other animals, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Grace and the eastern field. She decided to enlist the help of her closest friend, Jake Morrison, a local veterinarian who often stopped by to check on her animals. By noon, Jake arrived in his old pickup truck, his lanky frame and easy smile a welcome sight. "So, what's this about Grace guarding a field?" he asked, grabbing his bag of supplies. Emily sighed, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "She won't let me near it, Jake. She's acting like something's out there, but I can't see anything." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's take a look." The two walked toward the eastern field where Grace was still stationed near the gate. Her ears swiveled toward them, and she let out a warning whinny as they approached. "See what I mean?" Emily said, gesturing toward the mare. "She's never done this before." Jake studied Grace's behavior carefully. "She's definitely agitated. Horses can be pretty intuitive. They pick up on things we don't. Could be a predator nearby, maybe a coyote or a stray dog." Emily shook her head. "We've had coyotes before, and she's never acted like this. It's almost like she's protecting something." Jake nodded thoughtfully. let's try something." He opened his bag and pulled out an apple, holding it out toward Grace. "Hey there, girl. What's got you all worked up?" Grace eyed the apple warily, her body tense. She sniffed the air, then took a hesitant step forward. But as soon as Jake moved toward the gate, she blocked his path, snorting and shaking her head. "Well, she's serious about keeping us out," Jake said, stepping back. "We might need to investigate from a distance." Emily grabbed a pair of binoculars from the barn, and the two climbed onto a nearby fence post to get a better view of the field. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The grass swayed gently in the breeze, and the tree line cast long shadows over the far end of the field. Then Emily saw it, a patch of grass that looked trampled, as though something had been lying there recently. "Jake, look," she said, handing him the binoculars, "over by the trees." Jake adjusted the focus, his expression darkening. "Yeah, I see it. Something's been there. Could be an animal." Emily's pulse quickened. "But why would Grace be guarding it like this?" Jake shrugged. "Only one way to find out, but we're going to have to find a way past her." The next morning, Emily decided to try a different approach. She brought a second bucket of feed, setting it down a few feet away from the field. Grace hesitated but eventually walked over, her hunger outweighing her vigilance. Seizing the opportunity, Emily slipped through the gate and into the field, Jake following close behind. They moved cautiously toward the patch of trampled grass, their boots crunching softly against the ground. Grace noticed them almost immediately, letting out a distressed whinny. But instead of charging at them, she circled the area, her movements protective yet reluctant to stop them entirely. When they reached the spot, Emily's breath caught. Nestled among the tall grass was a small, trembling figure, a young foal, no more than a few days old. Its coat was a light chestnut color, its legs gangly and unsteady as it tried to stand. It looked weak, malnourished, and frightened. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, dropping to her knees. "It's a foal." Jake crouched beside her, his professional demeanor kicking in. "Looks like it was abandoned. No sign of the mother anywhere." Emily's heart ached as she reached out gently, her hand brushing against the foal's soft coat. The tiny creature flinched, but didn't move away, too weak to resist. "Grace must have found it," Emily said, glancing back at her mare, who was watching them intently. "She's been protecting it this whole time." Jake nodded. Horses are incredibly empathetic. She must have sensed it was in trouble and decided to take care of it. The foal let out a feeble whinny, its small body trembling. Emily's chest tightened. "We need to get it back to the barn. It won't survive out here much longer." Jake hesitated. "Grace might not let us take it. She's pretty attached." Emily glanced at her mare, then back at the foal. "We'll have to convince her we're helping." Slowly, Emily wrapped her jacket around the foal, lifting it carefully in her arms. The foal was light, its fragile frame fitting snugly against her chest. Grace let out a sharp snort, stepping closer, but Emily held her ground. "It's okay, Grace," she said softly. "We're going to take care of it, I promise." Grace hesitated, her ears flicking nervously, but after a tense moment, she stepped aside, allowing Emily and Jake to pass. As they carried the foal back to the barn, Emily couldn't help but marvel at Grace's intuition and protectiveness. her mare had saved this tiny life, and now it was up to Emily to ensure the foal had a fighting chance. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change everything. Back in the barn, the foal lay nestled in a soft bed of hay wrapped in Emily's jacket. Grace lingered just outside the stall, her golden coat gleaming in the morning sunlight as she kept a watchful eye on the new arrival. Emily had never seen her mare so protective, even when it came to other horses in the pasture. It was clear that Grace had formed an immediate bond with the orphaned foal. "All right, let's see how you're doing," Jake said, kneeling beside the tiny creature. He opened his vet kit, carefully examining the foal's trembling body. Its chestnut coat was patchy and dull, and its ribs were visible beneath its thin frame. The foal let out a weak whinny as Jake gently lifted one of its legs, checking for injuries. "She's malnourished, but otherwise intact," Jake said, his voice steady. "No signs of trauma, which is a good thing. She'll need plenty of care to recover." Emily sighed with relief, though her concern didn't ease entirely. "Do you think she was abandoned by her mother?" Jake frowned, packing up his kit. "It's possible. Sometimes a mare will reject her foal if she's unwell or unable to produce enough milk, but it's odd. This foal looks like she hasn't had a mother's care for several days, maybe longer. I'd expect her to be in worse condition if that were the case." Emily brushed a strand of hay from the foal's forehead, her heart aching for the tiny creature. "Then how did she end up here? There aren't any other farms nearby." Jake stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's the question, isn't it? Someone might have dropped her off, thinking she'd have a better chance here. Or maybe she wandered here on her own." "Wandered?" Emily echoed, glancing at the frail foal. "She can barely stand. How could she have wandered all the way to my field?" Jake didn't have an answer. He looked down at the foal, his expression contemplative. "Either way, she's lucky Grace found her. Without her protection, I doubt she'd have survived another night." Over the next few days, Emily devoted herself to nursing the foal back to health. She purchased specialized milk replacer from the feed store and set up a schedule for bottle feeding. The foal was hesitant at first, but hunger quickly won out, and she began to feed with more enthusiasm. Grace was never far away. She would nicker softly whenever the foal made a sound, and she seemed to relax only when Emily or Jake was present. It was clear that the mare had taken on the role of surrogate mother, even if she couldn't provide milk. Emily decided to name the foal Willow, after the tall, resilient trees that dotted the Cedar Ridge landscape. By the end of the first week, Willow had gained some strength. Her legs were still wobbly, but she managed to stand for short periods, her large brown eyes bright with curiosity. Grace often nudged her gently, encouraging her to explore the stall. "She's a fighter," Jake remarked one evening as he watched Willow take her first tentative steps around the barn. "You've done a great job, Emily." Emily smiled, brushing Willow's soft coat with a gentle hand. "I couldn't have done it without Grace. She's been incredible." Jake nodded, glancing at the mare. "There's something special about her. I've never seen a horse take to a foal like this, especially one that isn't her own." Emily stroked Grace's mane, her heart swelling with gratitude. "She's always been special, but this, it's like she knew Willow needed her." As the days turned into weeks, Willow continued to thrive under Emily's care. She grew stronger, her coat becoming shinier and her movements more confident. Emily introduced her to the other horses on the farm, though she always kept a close eye on her interactions. Willow was playful and curious, but she remained closely bonded to Grace, following her around the pasture like a shadow. One afternoon, as Emily was cleaning the barn, she noticed something unusual. Grace had been lying in the corner of the stall, watching over Willow, but now she was on her feet, her ears pricked, and her head turned toward the field. She let out a sharp whinny, her muscles tense. "What is it, girl?" Emily asked, stepping outside. Grace had been on edge ever since Willow arrived, but this was different. Her body language was alert, almost defensive. Emily followed Grace's gaze toward the far edge of the field, where the tree line met the open pasture. At first, she saw nothing out of the ordinary, but as she squinted, she caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of white against the dark green foliage. Her pulse quickened. Was it another horse? A stray animal? She grabbed a pair of binoculars from the tack room and scanned the tree line. The shape became clearer. A large white horse stood partially hidden among the trees, its coat gleaming in the sunlight. It was watching them, its head held high and its ears swiveling. Emily's breath caught. She had never seen this horse before, and it wasn't one of her own. How had it ended up here? "Jake," she called, waving him over. He had just pulled up in his truck, carrying a bag of feed for Willow. "What's going on?" he asked, jogging over. Emily handed him the binoculars. "Look over there by the trees. Do you see it?" Jake adjusted the focus, his brow furrowing. "It's a horse," he said slowly. "A big one. Looks like a draft breed. Do you know whose it is?" Emily shook her head. "I've never seen it before, but Grace has. Look at her." They turned to see Grace pacing near the fence, her head held high and her ears pinned forward. She let out another whinny, her body language both wary and curious. "Do you think it could be Willow's mother?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with hope. Jake considered it. "It's possible. If Willow wandered here, or was left here, her mother might have been nearby. But why would the mare stay hidden all this time?" Emily's chest tightened. If the white horse was Willow's mother, why hadn't she approached? Was she injured? Scared? She couldn't ignore the possibility that the mare might be in trouble. "We need to check it out," Emily said firmly. "If it's her mother, she deserves to be with Willow." Jake nodded. "Let's go." Emily and Jake approached the tree line cautiously, keeping their movements slow and deliberate so as not to spook the horse. Grace followed them part way, but she stopped near the fence, watching intently as they ventured into the trees. The white mare didn't run. She stood her ground, her large, expressive eyes watching them with a mixture of wariness and recognition. As they drew closer, Emily could see that she was thin, her ribs faintly visible beneath her shimmering coat. But despite her condition, she carried herself with an air of quiet dignity. "Easy, girl," Emily said softly, holding out her hand. The mare's ears flicked, and she took a tentative step forward, sniffing the air. Jake circled around slowly, his voice calm. "She doesn't look aggressive, just cautious. Let's see if she'll let us approach." The mare allowed them to come closer, though she flinched slightly when Emily reached out to touch her neck. Her coat was smooth but dirty, As though she had been living in the wild for some time, Emily noticed faint scars along her flanks, the marks of old injuries that had long since healed. "She's been through a lot," Jake said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "But she's strong." Emily glanced back toward the field where Willow and Grace were watching from a distance. "Do you think she knows Willow is here?" Jake nodded. "If she's her mother, she'd recognize her scent. Horses have an incredible sense of smell. She might have been staying nearby to keep watch." Emily's heart ached at the thought. The mare had likely endured countless hardships to stay close to her foal, yet she had kept her distance, perhaps out of fear or uncertainty. "We need to bring her back to the farm," Emily said. "She belongs with Willow." Jake nodded. "Let's do it." As they led the mare toward the field, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than they realized. The connection between Grace, Willow, and the mysterious mare was undeniable, but the pieces of the puzzle had yet to fall into place. As the mare stepped into the sunlight, her coat gleaming like silver, Emily felt a surge of hope. Whatever secrets this family of horses held, she was determined to uncover them and to give them the future they deserved. The moment the white mare stepped into the open field, Grace let out a loud whinny and trotted forward to meet her. Willow, still unsteady on her small legs, attempted to follow, but quickly fell behind. Emily watched in awe as the two adult horses approached each other, their movements cautious, but filled with an undeniable familiarity. "They know each other," Jake said quietly, his voice tinged with wonder. Grace and the white mare stood nose to nose, their breaths mingling in the cool afternoon air. Grace nudged the mare gently, her body language soft and reassuring. The white mare responded by lowering her head, her ears swiveling as though in acknowledgement. It was a silent exchange, one that spoke volumes to Emily and Jake, even if they couldn't fully understand it. Willow, after a few wobbly attempts, finally reached the pair. The white mare's attention shifted instantly to the foal. She lowered her head, sniffing Willow from head to tail as though to confirm her identity. Willow let out a tiny whinny, her tail swishing with excitement as she nuzzled the mare's neck. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "She's her mother," she said softly, her voice catching. "She has to be." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the scene before them. "It makes sense. She must have stayed close to watch over Willow, but was too scared or weak to approach." Over the next few days, Emily worked to integrate the white mare, whom she decided to name Luna, into the routine of the farm. Luna was skittish at first, her trust clearly hard-earned, but her bond with Willow and Grace made the transition easier. Grace continued to act as a maternal figure, standing protectively between Luna and the other horses whenever they grew too curious. Luna's condition was a concern. Her ribs were still visible and her movements were stiff, likely from spending months scavenging for food in the wild. Emily made it her mission to nurse the mare back to health, preparing a special diet rich in nutrients and supplements. "You're safe now, Luna," Emily whispered one evening as she brushed the mare's silken coat. Luna leaned into the touch, her large, expressive eyes softening. Willow, meanwhile, thrived under the combined care of her two maternal figures. She grew more confident by the day, her playful spirit bringing life to the farm. She loved chasing the other horses around the pasture, her tiny legs moving faster than anyone thought possible. but she always returned to Grace and Luna, her safe haven in a world that was still new and overwhelming. As Luna's strength returned, Emily noticed something peculiar. The markings on Luna's coat, which she had initially thought were simple scars or dirt, began to reveal a distinct pattern. The silvery white of her fur contrasted sharply with faint, swirling shapes that seemed almost intentional, like brushstrokes on a canvas. One particular marking along her flank resembled the shape of a crescent moon. "Jake, come take a look at this," Emily called one afternoon as she examined Luna's coat. Jake approached, his brow furrowing as he studied the markings. "That's unusual," he said. "I've seen plenty of horses with unique patterns, but this looks deliberate." Emily nodded. "Do you think she was branded, or could it be natural?" Jake shrugged. "It's hard to say, but it's possible she came from a place where they marked their horses this way. Maybe she escaped." The thought troubled Emily. If Luna had been branded, it meant she might have endured harsh treatment before finding her way to Cedar Ridge. It also raised the possibility that someone might come looking for her. Determined to learn more, Emily took photos of Luna's markings and began researching horse registries and forums. She reached out to local and national equestrian groups, sharing the images and asking if anyone recognized the pattern. Weeks passed with little response, but Emily's persistence paid off. One evening, she received an email from a woman named Margaret Hensley, an equine historian who specialized in rare horse breeds. The message read, "Dear Emily, I came across your post about Luna and her unique markings. Based on the photos, I believe she might be a descendant of a rare breed known as the Andalusian Crescent Horse. These horses were bred in the 1800s for their beauty and intelligence, and they were often marked with patterns resembling celestial symbols, if I'm correct. Luna's markings could indicate she comes from a very rare lineage. I'd be happy to discuss this further if you're interested." Emily's heart raced as she reread the message. She had never heard of the Andalusian Crescent Horse, but the description fit Luna perfectly. She quickly replied, setting up a call with Margaret to learn more. When Margaret visited the farm a few days later, she was immediately drawn to Luna. The older woman was kind and knowledgeable, her gray hair tied back in a neat braid as she moved with practiced ease around the horses. "She's magnificent," Margaret said, her voice filled with admiration. "And you're right, these markings are no accident. They're a hallmark of her breed." Emily listened intently as Margaret explained the history of the Andalusian Crescent Horse. Bred for their grace and stamina, these horses were often used by noble families in Europe. Their markings were considered a sign of good fortune, and many were trained for dressage and ceremonial roles. "Unfortunately, the breed fell out of favor over time," Margaret continued. "Most of them were sold or abandoned, and their lineage became difficult to trace. It's incredibly rare to find one today, especially in the United States." Emily glanced at Luna, who was grazing peacefully beside Willow. "How do you think she ended up here?" Margaret shook her head. "It's hard to say. She could have been part of a private collection or imported for breeding. But one thing's for certain, she's special, and she's lucky to have found you." As Emily learned more about Luna's past, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. Luna wasn't just any horse. She was a living piece of history. Emily decided to honor that legacy while also ensuring that Luna Grace and Willow could live out their days in peace. With Margaret's guidance, Emily began training Luna for dressage. Despite her time in the wild, Luna took to the discipline with remarkable ease, her movements fluid and precise. Willow often watched from the sidelines, mimicking her mother's steps with an endearing clumsiness. The bond between the three horses grew stronger each day. Grace remained the steadfast protector. Luna provided the nurturing presence of a mother, and Willow brought joy and light to their lives. Together, they were a family forged by fate, each member playing a vital role. One crisp autumn morning, Emily stood at the edge of the pasture, watching as the horses roamed freely. Luna's coat gleamed in the sunlight, her crescent marking catching the light as she galloped alongside Willow and Grace. The sight filled Emily with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Look at them," Jake said, joining her at the fence. "You've created something special here." Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving the horses. "I didn't create it. They did. I just gave them the space to find each other." Jake smiled, his admiration for Emily clear. "You gave them a second chance. That's more than most people would do." As the wind rustled through the trees carrying the scent of hay and wildflowers, Emily felt a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Luna's mysterious arrival had been the start of something extraordinary, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, love and resilience could create something beautiful. The horses trotted toward the fence, their breaths visible in the crisp air. Emily reached out to stroke Luna's neck, her heart swelling with affection. "Welcome home," she whispered. And for the first time in years, Emily truly felt at home too.